This episode of Paradigm Profiles is called Maddog's Missionaries. Andrew Maddog Cervantes is a legendary name in the city of Stockton, California. It's also a name that's known and respected within the Nuestra Familia as one of the top influential leaders that composes the organization's upper echelon. Albert Burr Laris from Salinas, Henry Big Happy Cervantes from Lodi, and Sheldon Skip Villanueva are three other names within the NF leadership circle that are also spoken of with a lot of reverence and admiration. This story is about a chain of events that involved the four of them, the crimes they committed, and how they were all indicted on federal RICO racketeering and corruption charges for following Maddog's directives. All four of these brothers are longtime NF members and have all been involved with NF street activities dating all the way back to the 70s and 80s. What a lot of people don't know about Maddog is that unlike a lot of us who come from a broken or dysfunctional family, or who grew up from a young age entrenched in the criminal element or the gang lifestyle, Maddog wasn't. He didn't become a product of his surroundings, and he didn't gravitate towards the streets searching for a surrogate mother or father who had abandoned him. The picture above is Maddog to the right, and GQ from Stockton is on the left. Maddog was the eldest of 7 brothers and sisters, and he was born and raised in South Stockton. Contrary to popular belief, he never gangbanged on the streets. In fact, he got married at a very young age and became a hard-working family man to support his young family. You guys may have heard other stories about Maddog and some of the details of the events that I'm about to talk about, but the dates, the information, and some of the details that were told is inaccurate. That came from a reliable source. Some of it is embellished for the purpose of telling a good story, and some of it was just made up. Or you can say it's just slick guesswork. I don't understand why some people do this, but like I said before, this just creates confusion and muddies the waters. For the record, I'll just say this. If I give you guys details about a particular incident, it's factual because I know what I'm talking about. I'm not adding my own details or speculating. If I don't know something, I just won't talk about it. I'd rather just tell you guys that I don't know about something instead of creating my own details. Moving on. So when Maddog was in his early 20s, he got into an incident with another cat that got out of hand and escalated to the point to where Maddog allegedly stabbed him to death. One thing led to another, and Maddog ended up pulling out his blade and stabbing this dude. Out of concern for not getting caught up and wrapped up in a messy case, Maddog took off to LA and decided to stay with family. He had a couple primos that lived out there, so he headed out to LA to go lay low with them. They gave him a place to stay and helped him maintain a low profile, knowing he was possibly in a lot of trouble. While he was out there running around with his primos, they started hitting licks to make money and to help Maddog put some money in his pocket. Up until that point, nobody knew how bad things were. They didn't know if he was going to have to eventually flee to Mexico or if things would just maybe blow over and he could maybe just head back. Either way, he never got a chance to find out because he eventually ended up getting arrested with one of his primos for committing a robbery. It was a spur of the moment kind of thing that wasn't planned, and he got busted dead bang in the middle of it. Maddog went in, committed the robbery while his primo waited outside in the car. When Maddog came out of the establishment that they were hitting, the cops rolled up on him while he was literally still holding the gun in his hands. This took place in 1978. After he was arrested, he was booked into the San Bernardino County Jail. It was at this time that the MA made an attempt at trying to recruit him, but he declined the offer as his beliefs weren't in line with the MA's. As a result of this robbery, he was sent to prison on his first bid and wouldn't hit the streets again until 1985. Because he caught his case in Southern California, the first joint he passed through was Chino. And at that time, Chino's Palm Hall was considered to be an NF stronghold. During the time he was housed in Palm Hall, he began to meet a lot of carnales from both Northern and Southern California. As he began to form strong bonds with some of these brothers, he also learned about what the Nuestra Familia truly stood for, and these were the things he believed in himself. He had personally seen the way the MA was abusing the raza who weren't affiliated with their organization, and how they were imposing their will on those who weren't a part of it. And this was something he took a strong disliking to. This is when Maddog became a familiano and officially aligned himself with the NF. He would later go from being known as just Andrew from Stockton to Maddog from Stockton because of the way he was described as being whenever he was putting in work. They said he would be like a mad dog going crazy, sometimes stabbing his victims 60 to 70 times, and he'd never stop. He'd even keep going until he'd get shot, and he wouldn't stop until the brothers would tell him to just get down. In fact, Maddog's been shot so many times that he's got birdshot and buckshot scars all over his back. Another legendary name out of Stockton was a guy named Rocky Rontel. Picture of Rontel is inserted to the right. Maddog and Rontel, or Maddog and Rocky, ran together in the joint, and these two wreaked havoc on the opposition. Both of them were known for putting in a lot of work, and together they had a long-standing history for butchering their victims. Maddog paroled from Folsom 4A in 1985 on the robbery and stayed out for less than a year. In 1986, he picked up a weapons violation, did 2 years, and then touched back down in 1988. Less than a year later, in 1989, he picked up a gun case, bailed out in 1990, and fought the case from the streets. Meanwhile, he maintained his position as the overseer of the Stockton Regiment and continued to fulfill his obligations out there on the street until he picked up another dope case for possession for sale. Joker, Maddog's younger brother, is inserted in the picture above, second from the right. The gun case sent him to federal prison under the trigger lock law, and he took a 5-year plea bargain on the state sales case. Once he finished up his federal time on the gun case, they sent him back to state prison to do 5 years state time on the dope case. So as you can see, that one night that he allegedly caught that stabbing, it ended up changing his life forever. And from that point on, he basically continued getting shuffled back and forth between state and federal prison. Once the system got a hold of him, he was never able to free himself from the grip it had on him. After he got out from doing his state time, he ended up getting caught up in the 1992 San Jose indictments for conspiring to kill Tony Little Weasel Herrera, and then he was also charged in another RICO case in 1993 with his younger brother, NF member David Joker Marquez, NF member George GQ Quinones, NF member Dion Garolaga, NR member Tony Flaco Jimenez, NF member Xavier Joker Lozano, NF member Richard RB Cagadas, and NR member Johnny Peraza. In the end, the only two that didn't cooperate and who ended up standing trial were Maddog and his younger brother Joker. Maddog was found guilty and was sentenced to 17.5 years, and Joker was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison respectively. I believe this is around the time Maddog came through San Quentin when I was there to either get shipped off to finish up the rest of his state time or to get transferred out to start doing his 17.5-year federal bid. Joker, Maddog's younger brother, is in the back row, fourth from the left, in the picture inserted above. Either way, I remember him striking through and getting at me while he was there. So in the early 90s, Maddog was appointed to act as a RSD, Regimental Security Department, for the Stockton Regiment, or the Stockton Colonia. An RSD back then is the equivalent of an RC today, and back in the 80s, early 90s, regiments were called colonias, colonies in Spanish. The only difference between an RC and an RSD is that instead of him overseeing a localized regiment that was just contained to just Stockton, he was appointed to oversee an entire region. His region not only covered Stockton, but also most of the smaller cities north of Stockton, and then he also had parts of Oakland, San Francisco, and San Jose. In fact, in September of 1990, when there was a huge infusion of NF members that all paroled to San Jose, they had to drive out to Stockton for the purpose of Maddog delegating and appointing the leadership structure. Lucky, Dump Truck, Silencio, Spanquillo, Huevo, and some of the other C's out there in San Jose at the time were technically all considered to be unproven. None of those brothers had bodies under their belts, and in fact, a lot of them were being scrutinized because of this. I'm not trying to get off track, but let me just explain something to you guys. Although the San Jose Regiment of the early 90s would later become one of the most violent regiments in the history of the NF, and although they dropped a lot of bodies out there, there's a very important backstory to this. Truth be told, that most, if not all, these C's who were part of the San Jose Regiment were C's who were in question for initially not killing most of the targets they would later kill. A lot of people don't know about these inside facts or these internal details, but Maddog, his little brother Joker, and 9 other members from the Stockton Regiment all drove out to San Jose for the sole purpose of admonishing the C's who were functioning in the San Jose Regiment and checking them about handling their business. When the orders came down to kill Tony Little Weasel Herrera, Robert Fat Cow Jasso, Alfonso Güero Urango, Larry Valles, Marcos Puppet Baca, Ray Chocolate Perez, Eli Rosas, and some of the others, the orders weren't immediately acted upon. Some of these directives were sat on, and some of these C's would later catch flack about this. In those days, it was a requisite as part of your commitment that you had to have a body under your belt, and it wasn't just anybody. It had to be a body that was dropped solely for the purpose of the NF, and solely for that purpose only. None of the brothers out there had put in any work. Lucky, Silencio, Huevo, Spanquillo, Skip, etc., etc. Listen, my purpose here isn't to put any of these C's in a bad light. My only purpose is to give you guys the facts and to tell you everything that happened. With regards to Skip, although he's earned his bones now and has put in a lot of work for the organization, Skip was never known to be someone who was real violent. Skip was a shrewd moneymaker on the streets, and that's what he was known for. He had the Blancos in pocket, and they put him on. Skip's favorite words back in those days were, "I'll be back, I gotta pick up this money." That's what Skip was known for, being a baller and a little player. All his violence would come later. To be honest, a lot of C's in the Bay, Pelican Bay, continue to question how Skip earned his Cat 3 status or how he was elevated to the rank of a captain without ever having dropped a body. And Skip knew this. Skip basically went to federal prison looking for a body. He practically created his own reasoning for killing the individuals that he did. Charles Charlie O. Snell from Hayward was killed by Skip because he refused to iron a pair of Skip's pants. There's more to it than just the pants. Skip justified the killing by saying that Charlie O had disrespected him, but truth be told, Charlie O basically became collateral damage for Skip because he needed a body. He needed to be stamped, and he butchered Charlie O. Charlie O was a big dude. I knew him personally and did time with him in San Quentin during the early to mid 90s. But the reason Skip was able to get him the way he did is because he snaked him. He hit him while his back was turned, and the first hit to his neck basically incapacitated him. It was a deadly hit that dropped him on the spot. And in all fairness to Skip, when I say he snaked him, that's not a slight against Skip, as if he carried out some type of underhanded. And in all fairness to Skip, when I say he snaked him, that's not a slight against Skip, as if he carried this out in some type of underhanded fashion. Because in prison, that's how it's done. When you stab someone, there's nothing fair about it. 9 times out of 10, they always get hit when they either got their back turned or they're not looking, so Skip didn't do it any different. But once Skip hit him, he stayed on him, butchering him until his arm got tired and he couldn't even lift up his arm anymore. People that were there said that Skip even walked away a couple times and then went back to finish him off. Pete Gutierrez from Fresno, another one of Skip's victims, was killed simply because Pete revealed that he was an old dropout without really knowing who he was exposing this to. At the time, Pete had no idea that he was talking to Skip from San Jose. He must have just assumed that he was just talking to another homeboy who had just hit the yard. But this was a critical mistake that would ultimately cost him his life. Federal prison and the politics in federal prison are nothing like state prison or the politics that are pushed in state prison. Pete obviously got too complacent and too comfortable when it came to how he introduced himself and how he identified himself with being just an old NF dropout from California. However, Pete, for all intents and purposes, was still riding with the homeboys and had actually fought side by side in some of the wars on those yards. He could have been utilized, but again, Skip was searching high and low for bodies. Even Tarzan believed that Pete should have been left alone and should have just been utilized. And with regards to Tarzan, I know that there's been other people who have portrayed him to be a high-ranking leader who was part of the federal NF leadership. Listen, don't take my word for it, but I'm telling you now that this couldn't be any further from the truth. Tarzan didn't care about politics, and in fact, he didn't want to be part of the politics. In fact, he flew under the radar in the federal prison system for almost 20 years until someone finally plugged him back in and revealed what USP he was at. He was really a Cat 1, and this wasn't because he didn't have the wherewithal or the mental capabilities of being a leader. He just didn't want to be one. Do your own research from some of these guys that did time with him. When it was time to kill, Tarzan would be there with 2 knives, and he was always ready and willing to kill. But he just didn't care about being part of the leadership, and he didn't want to be known for that. Tarzan was the kind of C you'd find somewhere on the yard, standing on his head doing his daily meditation or getting in touch with his spiritual inner being. Those are facts. So before you guys take everything you hear as being golden, do your own research and look into this stuff for yourself. Another individual that's been misspoken on is Andy Chino Flores from Stockton. There's been so many people who have had bad information provided about them that it's honestly hard to keep up with them. Maybe people got this information from a law enforcement officer, or maybe it was derived from someone who thought they knew what they were talking about, but it's simply inaccurate. And I'm not slamming anyone or implying that anyone is purposely misleading. All I'm doing is setting the record straight. If I didn't make these corrections, then I would be doing you guys a disservice. Listen, Andy Chino Flores was never an NF member. Let me say that again. Andy Chino Flores was never an NF member. If people really knew their history, then they'd know that Chino was one of the most influential members and one of the founding members of a Southside Stockton gang known as Little Unity. Little Unity was one of the most strongest and dangerous gangs that ever came out of Stockton, and Chino was instrumental in forging a strong alliance with the NF in Stockton. He was never part of the NF. In fact, he is the only former gang member in Stockton that still has a standing order from Maddog to leave him alone and to never bring harm to him. This standing order is still in effect today. With all due respect to Chino, he's now homeless, living on the streets, and is doing bad out there. But yet, he is still respected, and this order from Maddog has withstood the test of time. Nobody's ever challenged or questioned this either. Now, with regard to Lucky, Silencio, and Huevo, again, these C's were all unproven and were under investigation for a long time because they had never put in any work and had failed to drop a body. In fact, let me just say this. I have nothing bad to say about Huevo, and I don't wish to put him in any kind of negative light. But the truth is that Huevo came really close to being a victim himself. This was because of trouble he continued to get himself in, and because he brought this upon himself. In fact, at one point, the C's had even thrown Huevo in the trunk of a car and actually debated on whacking him. He ultimately got everything cleared up and did his own cleanup, but there's just certain things that you just can't wipe away from past history. So what you guys need to understand is that although a lot of these C's from San Jose have gotten a lot of recognition from all the bodies that were dropped in the early 90s, the truth of the matter is that a lot of this was old cleanup, and some of it was that these brothers had to step up and prove themselves because they were being questioned. In retrospect, when I think back about all this now, I honestly believe that this was probably one of the main reasons, or at the forefront of the reasons, why Silencio, Spanquillo, and Huevo were never given a street regiment when they were on death row. They didn't receive high praise or huge accolades for killing the people that they killed. It was looked at as if this was work that they should have put in, and that this was work that they were bound to put in. Since I'm giving you guys all the backstory on some of these other C's, I might as well give you Happy's history as well. Happy's from Lodi. He was born and raised out there, and he was well known on the streets. But he wasn't known like people might think he was known for. He wasn't known as a high-ranking honorable C who had the whole city of Lodi fully supporting him. Again, don't take my word for it. Do your own research, and you'll find this stuff out for yourself. Happy always had a huge drug problem. He stayed high on meth and was known to always be tweaked out. In fact, he was known for staying up for days at a time, barricading himself in one of his properties that was known in Lodi as the Compound. And again, I'm not saying this about Happy to put him in a bad light, because I like Happy, and I myself wasn't a perfect C either. I had my own flaws, but this profile isn't about me. But I'll just tell you like this, any homie from Lodi that really knew Happy and how he operated out there would tell you themselves what he was known for and what he used to do out there. One of the other things that Happy did that didn't go over well with a lot of C's is how he used to treat some of the NR members that he had working under him out there on the streets. Happy had a fetish for robbing banks, and it was a goal of his to someday hit an armored car. All he talked about was robbing banks. He was infatuated with it. When he finally did put one of his plans in motion, he got a couple NR members to suit up and execute a plan to rob one of the local banks in Stockton. The NR members that performed the robbery executed his plan flawlessly and made out with a whopping $100K. Happy didn't actually participate in the robbery himself. He orchestrated it and monitored the whole job. However, when these brothers all sat down to divide the money that was taken in the robbery, Happy handed them each a meager $1,000 and kept the rest for himself. His excuse at the time was that this money was going to be used to fill the NF coffers. However, later, after these brothers ended up in prison for other crimes, they reported this to other C's who vowed to look into it. When it was finally looked into, it was discovered that less than $5,000 had actually been sent to leadership, who was in charge of overseeing the organization's main bank. His contributions at the time that this robbery was committed equated to less than $5,000 total. So he basically pocketed the money and kept it for himself. This type of blatant abuse of authority is what makes Norteños not want to work with the NF, and he just straight fucked these brothers over. But anyways, I got off track with these backstories, so let me get back to how Maddog was instrumental in helping to establish the San Jose Regiment. Initially, Louis Dump Truck Chavez was appointed to act as the RSD for the San Jose Colonia, and this was under the auspices of Joseph Pinky Hernandez and Vincent Chente Arroyo. However, because of Dump Truck's failure to participate in a sanctioned homicide of a known NF hermit, Maddog demoted Dump Truck and promoted another unproven NF member, Ronald Lucky Shelton, at the conclusion of this meeting. The meeting was held at a trusted female friend of Maddog's by the name of Lisa Cuevas. Among those in attendance at this meeting was also Bobby Silencio Lopez, James Huevo Trajique, both from San Jose, and then from the Stockton Regiment was Maddog's little brother, David Joker Marquez, and George GQ Quinones. Dump Truck would later get spooked because he began to sense and see the writing on the wall. It wasn't only the fact that he got demoted that spooked him, it was also the way some of the other regimental members interacted with him that alerted him and let him know that he was in shaky standings. In any event, over the course of a good 20-month span, the San Jose Regiment had basically wiped out all their set targets and a few extras. Every C over there that was in question for not having a body under their belt had blood on their hands, and they were all stamped out. But this was done under the auspices and guidance of Maddog and some of the other brothers from the Stockton Regiment. So one of the other things that people don't know about Maddog is that he's the one who's technically responsible for establishing the federal system for the NF. A lot of other people have displaced this credit by claiming that Skip was the one who actually established the federal system following Operation Black Widow, but this simply is not true. According to what people have said in the past, Skip was supposedly instructed to go scout out the federal system by Corny, Pinky, and Tibbs prior to them all entering into their guilty pleas and prior to them being transported out from the Glenn Dyer Federal Detention Facility in Oakland. It's been said that this is why Skip jumped on his 14-year deal and was the first one to plead out. But again, this isn't true. Skip played a role in helping to establish the federal system, and he definitely broke ground, but Maddog had already established that system well before Skip, Corny, Pinky, Tibbs, and any of the other C's that would come later. Maddog forged several critical alliances with other groups such as the Mexicanami M, the Texas branch of the MA, the Texas Sindicate, and several other groups that would be instrumental in allowing the NF to prosper and exist in some of the federal USPs. The inserted document is an actual signed agreement that was signed by Maddog and some of the other representatives of these groups. This is a rare document that very few people have ever seen, and although signing a document like this isn't typical among some of the criminal organizations in California, this is standard procedure in the federal system. Signing a document like this is a requirement that's mandated by the Federal Prison Administration whenever prison gangs were considered to be past known enemies. If this document wouldn't have been signed, then these prison groups wouldn't have been allowed to coexist on these yards together. The Texas Sindicate and the Mexican MA are also fierce rivals with the California MA and any active sureños that operate under their guise. It's for this reason, and for this reason alone, that alliances were forged with and amongst these groups. So although Skip played a significant role in helping to establish some of the yards on the USPs, it was Maddog who deserves the bulk of the credit for establishing the system for the NF. For those people who know Maddog, I'm sure they'll echo these sentiments when it comes to describing him as an individual and his overall character as a C. He's one of the few C's that nobody can ever say anything bad about. I've never heard anyone say anything bad about him ever. He's one of the few true believers who honestly believes in the NF philosophy, and when it comes to the NF and NF law, he's strictly by the book. He's someone who's never believed in drug use, and he's very strict when it comes to this. The other thing that he's always been known for is being fair. He's one of the few C's who will afford you your due process if you got it coming, instead of jumping the gun or acting on a shoddy investigation. He genuinely cares about his fellow carnales, and he tries to look at things with a broad lens. And the other thing I'll say about Maddog is this. A lot of the old school C's from his era tend to look at norteños as outsiders, dissidents, or outcasts, almost as if they are somehow inferior and are some form of unproven misfits. I've known a few C's like this myself. DC is one of them. If you're not an NF member, he'll barely even talk to you or give you the time of day to even acknowledge you. That's just how they were. This form of arrogance is something that was tolerated and was openly displayed. But Maddog was different. He looked at all norteños as his little brothers. He loves norteños and embraces them with the kind of carnalismo that I've only seen one other C from his era embrace. And that was Mike MC Castillo from Salinas. But on the flip side of his equanimity was the other side of Maddog that people also knew him for too. His favorite words were, "Kill him." That was the end all to all the different forms of misconduct, tyranny, and dereliction that came before him. If the act was egregious enough, and if it was something that he considered to be shameful or conduct unbecoming of a member, his end all was always, "Kill him." He was fair, but he was also the kill now, ask questions later type of C too. In 2005, Maddog would get hit with yet another federal RICO case. Unfortunately for him, this case would all but guarantee that he would surely spend the rest of his life in federal prison and that he would also die there as well. The basis of this whole case derived from a series of intercepted phone calls, wiretaps, and phone conversations that the government spun up into an ambiguous conspiracy. It's a typical RICO case where they alleged Maddog was in a position of power and then passed or facilitated his directives through the use of complex coded letters, phone calls, prison visiting rooms, or through some other means of covert communications. The federal government claims that Maddog was a top-ranking leader or the overseer of the Nuestra Familia, and that he led this criminal organization from two federal USPs, Lewisburg and Allenwood in Pennsylvania. Maddog was obviously the main target in this indictment, and according to the indictment, he orchestrated and oversaw regimental commanders like Happy and Bird, who generated money through drug sales and other crimes like robbery. The money was then allegedly sent up the chain to other high-ranking leaders in federal prison. He's being accused specifically of using coded letters to order his fellow gang to kill a fellow Nuestra Familia gang member for failing to uphold the rules of the organization. They apparently had a videotape of the victim being stabbed 13 times in a cafeteria in USP Pollock in Louisiana. Demon is the inserted photo below. He's all the way to the left and is the one who was stabbed 13 times. But according to police reports and court transcripts, when it came to their methods of communication, they had different names that they used to reference each other, and this is how they identified specific members. Maddog was Lucy, Happy was Heather, and Bird was Becky or Rosa. These pseudonyms must have been in effect for quite some time because Bird and Maddog had been referred to Lucy and Rosa since as far back as 2008-2009. While this case was being put together, Maddog was in custody at USP Lewisburg, while both Happy and Bird were on the streets. Happy had just paroled to Oakland, and Bird had just paroled back to Salinas after they had both just finished up doing the 10 years that they had pled out to in Operation Black Widow. Honestly, there's been a lot of C's in the past, myself included, that have gotten caught up over using the phones. And when it comes to communicating over the phones, this has become a big problem. In several of the phone calls that the government used in this case, there were several slip-ups where even Maddog himself was making references saying I, but then quickly corrected himself saying Lucy. Skip was also calling this same third party to facilitate NF business, and wherever he'd referred to Maddog, he'd used the term underdog. And that's not exactly too inconspicuous. These kinds of miscues or slip-ups become damaging later and make it nearly impossible to beat the case. When Maddog, Happy, and Bird took this case to trial, there was another C by the name of Jaime Hennessy Cervantes from San Francisco who would also stand trial with them. I'll explain his involvement in the case later, but he was basically working under Happy and helped him destroy a crime scene. Several people testified against him at trial, including a former NF member by the name of Bismarck Nicoya Ocampo from San Francisco. I know Nicoya personally as he's from my hood. We not only did a lot of time together in the early to mid 90s, but we also functioned on the streets together. Mario Ochoa Gonzalez and Fernando Rango were other Norteños who also testified at this trial. In one of their communications, Maddog was charged with an assault for allegedly ordering a hit on an individual that was initially only known or identified as Demon. Later on, Demon was identified as Tobias Vigil. During the course of communications between Maddog and someone identified only as Polvo, the alleged plot to assault Demon was discussed. A mailroom officer who was responsible for monitoring the incoming and outgoing mail subsequently identified Polvo as Ernest Powder Killinger from Salinas. The inserted photo on the bottom right is Ernest Powder Killinger from Salas. Both cooperating witnesses, Nicoya and Gonzalez, would also later confirm this at trial. In a letter allegedly written by Maddog sometime in December of 2012, Maddog stated that Demonito is a waste of time and that Mom don't want him around the house. Translation: Demonito is a lost cause. Leadership wants him removed from the household. Based on some of the other communications that surrounded Demon, it sounds like he had Powder and possibly other people who were attempting to speak up on his behalf and possibly save him. A subsequent letter from another individual, Leonard Manny Vilches, relayed an inquiry to Maddog from Prima Polvo as to whether there were any other options for Dimona, given how well she has been behaving lately and what an asset she's been. Despite the attempts made to salvage Demon, Maddog allegedly responded to Vilches in a March 25, 2013 letter, stating that when Vilches speaks with Prima Polvo, he should let her know that it is still a yes. Translation: that when you speak to the C Powder, advise him that the green light on Demon is still a go. 2 days later, on March 27, 2013, the orders to assault Demon, pictured at left, were carried out at the United States Penitentiary USP McCreary in Kentucky. These guys were speaking in code, but there was nothing elaborate about the terms they were using. It's typical jargon that any intel officer can easily intercept. For example, they were also charged with orchestrating a drug smuggling operation and further trafficking narcotics. References to white items meant cocaine, references to green items meant marijuana, and references to black items meant heroin. That's elementary and very typical carnival talk. Its two other terms they utilized were Mormons and jazz, references used to describe NF members in Utah, or Tierra de Manzanas, Spanish for land of the apples, a reference to NF members in Washington state. In another letter, Maddog allegedly wrote to Powder at USP McCreary. He made a reference about sending money to the three amigos in Colorado that was clearly a reference made at that time about Cornelio Corny Tristan, Joseph Pinky Hernandez, and James Tibbs Murado. The indictment claims that both Happy and Bird were senior members of the NF who reported directly to Maddog. In September of 2011, Happy got into a personal disagreement with a 73-year-old by the name of John Gilbert Navarrete. The incident happened in an apartment complex located on the 3100 block of Coolidge Avenue in Oakland. The disagreement was drug and money related. As a result of the initial disagreement, Happy confronted Navarrete about the money and drugs that were in dispute and gave him one last chance to resolve the issue. Happy had already decided that he was going to kill Navarrete if he didn't produce what he felt was owed to him and if he didn't make things right. When Navarrete refused to agree with Happy's terms and they got into a heated argument about it, Happy pulled out a butcher knife that he had brought with him and began stabbing Navarrete to death. Navarrete's girlfriend, a 56-year-old female named Renee Washington, just so happened to also be there that day and was also stabbed and killed in the same room. Washington just ended up being collateral damage. She was basically at the wrong place at the right time, and Happy had no interest in leaving behind any living witnesses. For the rest of the day, Happy went into panic mode and desperately tried to come up with a plan to cover up the murders and to think of a viable way to get rid of the bodies. He left the bodies in the apartment for a full day until he enlisted the help of a fellow NF member, Jaime Hennessy Cervantes, and Norteño gang members Shane Bowman and Richard Martinez. Hennessy, Bowman, and Martinez poured gas all over strategic areas of the building and on the bodies themselves in an effort to burn down the building and to conceal the presence of the dead bodies. Later, Happy would make a futile attempt at claiming he killed Navarrete in Washington due to Navarrete being a former NF hermit. This was an internal admission he made within the NF so that he would hopefully be credited with 2 ultimate kills done solely for the purpose of the NF. This would give him the credibility he would need in order to attain legitimate Cat 3 status. In August of 2012, Bird was assisting with overseeing the San Jose Regiment, and he began working with some of the members who were out there functioning on the streets. Ruben Cruz, Joseph Joe Oaks, and fellow NF member Angel Young Buck Martinez were just a few of the San Jose guys that Bird began working close with. Bird had actually met Joe and Ruben in a bar out in Red Bluff. As time went on, they established a level of trust amongst each other and eventually set up a successful drug business in the Red Bluff area. At one point, Bird advised Ruben and Joe that he had a drug supplier in San Jose by the name of Joseph Fat Joe Behar, and that Fat Joe could possibly plug them in with an even bigger supplier with high-quality methamphetamine. Bird then contacted Fat Joe and made arrangements to meet with Fat Joe and another guy that Fat Joe claimed could supply as much dope as they wanted.
Bay Area's news station, Quan 4 News at 6 starts now.
Now at 6, after weeks of violence and murder, the picture San Jose police want you to see. Dozens of alleged gang members hauled into court under heavy guard. One defense attorney says it's all for a show.
A lot of these cases by themselves wouldn't make it to a jury.
It is called Operation Red Dawn. 4 different law enforcement agencies here in the Bay Area collaborate to take down several members of one of the most dangerous gangs along the West Coast, Nuestra Familia. Today, 34 alleged members of that gang were in court to hear the charges against them. Crown 4's Rob Flatterbow has the latest.
In
In a bizarre, unprecedented proceeding here at the Hall of Justice, the 8 women and 26 men entered Department 24 under heavy security. 2 of 6 bailiffs were armed with shotguns, but those closest to the defendants were unarmed. Prosecutors asked that no pictures be taken of them. Most of the male defendants wore handcuffs or waist chains. The accused faced charges ranging from murder and bank robbery to selling methamphetamine. Defense attorney Daniel Jensen, however, is critical of the DA's case.
But an awful lot of these cases are a single sale of meth to a person who says they bought it, who is sitting in jail trying to get favors from the district attorney's office.
On Tuesday, District Attorney Jeff Rosen announced a grand jury indictment of at least 39 individuals, many alleged Nuestra Family gang members, capping a 3-year probe of organized crime. Free on bail, Monica Orozco defended her alleged co-conspirators.
What the investigating officers do is they go to this person and they say, hey, we know you were in prison. We know you must have some connections with people in the streets. You must know something. We will help you get off of your life case if you start to just give us some names.
Prosecutors declined further comment on the grand jury's 99-page indictment, which alleges 77 felonies. Over the course of an hour, one by one, about half the defendants entered not guilty pleas, while the others saw an attorney for the first time. Most will return to court next month in what is being called easily the largest such case in Santa Clara County history. In San Jose, Rob Flattabo, KRON 4 News.
A few days later, Bird, Joe, Ruben, Fat Joe, and the connection they talked about meeting met up at a prearranged location in San Jose. They talked about networking, selling large amounts of marijuana and methamphetamine, and they also talked about combining resources. The connection was described as being almost cartel-based, with access to an unlimited amount of dope. Tweety is in the photo above, top second from left. Over the course of time, Bird continued to work with this connection, but he was also looking for more resources. At one point, the San Jose Regiment started purchasing dope from another connection by the name of Manuel Tweety Montiel. Tweety was also a norteño, so this worked in Bird's favor, as he was able to press Tweety in other ways he wouldn't necessarily be able to press outsiders in. But Tweety eventually began to pull back and tried regulating the way he chose to do business with the NF. This led to bad blood and soured the relationship he had with the regiment, and more specifically with Bird himself. It got to the point to where Bird got tired of tolerating Tweety's self-benefited business practices and just decided that enough was enough. Bottom line, Tweety got too chesty and too mouthy when it came to his interactions with Bird and other members of the regiment. As a result, they sent a squad to kick in his door, shake him down and take his dope. But things didn't go exactly as they had planned. When they kicked the door in, a fight broke out that involved Tweety and one of his boys who just so happened to be there. One thing led to another and gunshots were fired. After this incident happened, another issue came up between the San Jose Regiment that was being controlled by the state-led NF leadership and a couple individuals who were allegedly collecting money on behalf of the leadership for the NF's federal branch. Kung Fu is in the inserted photo to the right. Angel Young Buck Martinez and Martin Kung Fu Chacon were supposedly collecting drug money on the streets of San Jose under the direction of NF leadership in the federal prison system. Kung Fu is in the inserted photo below. Kung Fu was also allegedly identifying himself as the leader of the federal-led street regiment that he was operating for. I knew Kung Fu personally, as he was there in the Santa Clara County Jail with me back in 2004. At the time he was there, he was going through some issues where people were accusing him of possibly being an informant and working with the cops. I put him on freeze and looked into it, but I eventually cleared him because it ended up being bogus. Somebody was basically spreading negative rumors about him, and there was nothing to substantiate the allegations. Anyways, when former NF member Luis Wicked Barrios, who was in charge of the San Jose Street Regiment at that time, found out about what Kung Fu and Young Buck were doing, he sent word back to Kung Fu to cease and desist, or he was going to get whacked. Furthermore, he told Kung Fu that if he didn't stop identifying himself as the leader of a regiment that was supposedly being operated by NF leadership in the federal system, that he would face serious repercussions. Kung Fu ended up getting the message, but he continued to do what he was directed to do out there and basically disregarded everything Wicked was saying. But Kung Fu had other more pressing shit on his mind, and he intended on dealing with it. He was upset with specific members of the San Jose state-led regiment due to the incident that took place at Tweety's house. It's not like Tweety and Kung Fu were the best of friends, but they had personal ties that they maintained due to the fact that Tweety used to date the mother of Kung Fu's kids. For this reason alone, Kung Fu's kids were a basis that kept them tied together, as his kids would often be babysat at Tweety's house. It just so happened that when Wicked and Young Buck went to Tweety's house to shake him up and take his dope, Kung Fu's kids were there. This infuriated Kung Fu, and when he found out about it, this issue only continued to fester. There was already bad blood between these guys because of the rift that was going on between the state and federal factions, but this issue only escalated things and made it personal. Kung Fu wasn't a small guy, and he wasn't the type of dude to bite his tongue when he had a problem with someone. The incident with his kids was something that continued to weigh on him, and he made it clear that there were certain people out there who he was going to smash if and when he ever crossed paths with them. Unfortunately for him, Wicked was one of the names he continued dropping on the streets, and Wicked was an NF member. Right or wrong, this is something that you can't do out there, and this would eventually put him in a precarious position. When word got back to the wrong people that Kung Fu was making threats, it didn't take long for them to find a reason that would justify killing him. Someone started working the propaganda machine, and now some of Kung Fu's past issues were being brought back up and were being used to get him out of the way. Word on the streets began to circulate that Kung Fu was possibly an informant, and that at one time he may have been working with the cops. The same bullshit that I had cleared him up for almost 8 years earlier. On the day that Kung Fu was killed, Bird, Ruben, and Joe traveled from Red Bluff to San Jose. Bird mentioned to Ruben that Kung Fu might be an informant, and he was investigating the allegation. During the drive from Red Bluff, Bird called Young Buck. According to both Ruben and Joe, who would both later testify, the conversation sounded like a progress report to let Young Buck know that the three of them were getting close to San Jose. Ruben thought that they would be meeting Kung Fu, getting the methamphetamine, and then they'd be leaving. When they arrived in San Jose, the trio stopped at a fast food restaurant and ordered burritos. Bird called Young Buck again to tell him that they were there in San Jose and to meet them at the restaurant. Bird told Young Buck that they were going to meet Kung Fu, and he did not want Young Buck to leave until after the meeting. At the time, Young Buck was with a friend of his named Jesus Cervantes. Bird then called Kung Fu and told him to come over. After he made the phone call, Bird told Ruben and Joe that Kung Fu was on his way and asked Ruben if he had his money. Ruben answered yes, and Bird replied, "Good, because we're going to kill this dude." Ruben thought Bird was serious based on the way he looked. There was no further discussion on how the murder was going to take place or who was going to pull the trigger. Under Bird's direction, they drove over to an industrial area off Oakland Road near Charles Street. Young Buck and his friend Cervantes, who would later testify against them, parked in their truck. In a separate car, Bird, Joe, and Ruben parked on the opposite side and waited until Kung Fu arrived. When Kung Fu arrived, Bird got out of the car and had a conversation with Kung Fu. They talked for about 5 minutes, and that was it. Bird then walked back to Ruben and Joe, opened the car door, and made a gun shape with his hand towards Joe without saying a word. Joe then got out of the car, lifted up his shirt, and pulled out a gun, walking toward Kung Fu. Bird walked toward Kung Fu at the same time. Joe then shot Kung Fu multiple times without saying so much as even a word. Around the time that the shooting stopped, Ruben saw Bird go around to the back seat of Kung Fu's car and grab a bag. Ruben also saw Bird put something to the back of Kung Fu's head, and Kung Fu's head flew forward as blood spattered out of his mouth. Joe and Bird then went back to the car, and the three of them drove away. About 20 minutes later, they stopped at a gas station near the Fairfield area. Ruben saw Bird making several phone calls and claimed that he told someone that thing is done. Ruben thought that Bird called Young Buck and told him that they were on their way home and they were going to dump the guns. According to Ruben, the three of them left the guns in a dumpster at the gas station. Later, they examined what was inside the backpack taken from Kung Fu's car. They apparently found various electronics and some drug paraphernalia. Bird was pissed. He was obviously disappointed that they had not found drugs and stated that he must have had them hidden somewhere else in his car. No. When San Jose homicide detectives arrived on the scene after Kung Fu was killed, they found him dead inside his Chevy Impala with 2 ounces of methamphetamine inside Kung Fu's pants. Bird told Ruben to contact Fat Joe if anything should happen to him. Jesus Cervantes testified that him, Young Buck, Bird, and Bird's 2 little henchmen participated in Kung Fu's murder. Before the murder, they had a meeting about what was going to happen. Bird told Cervantes, "We about to kill Kung Fu." Cervantes responded, "Hey homie, I got nothing to say on that. Kung Fu had been doing a lot of fishy stuff. The men had heard that Kung Fu was in a relationship with a girl who worked with the FBI. And then there were issues with Kung Fu saying that he was the boss of San Jose." Young Buck drove a truck, and Cervantes claimed he sat in the passenger side. Bird and Joe, the actual shooter, were in a different car. They all parked and waited for Kung Fu to show up, and when he did, Bird got out of the car he was in and went to talk with Kung Fu. Later, Joe got out the car and shot Kung Fu point blank. He basically said the same thing as Ruben. After Kung Fu's murder sometime in September of 2012, Cervantes claimed that him, Young Buck, and Bird went to Salinas. On the way back from Salinas, Bird said that he got pulled as an NF member and that Fat Joe from Hayward, Vehar, also got pulled as an NF member as a sleeper. Only certain individuals know the status of those who are sleepers. At the time that Kung Fu was murdered, Fat Joe was a Norteño and had not yet been elevated to an NF member. Bird basically told them, he didn't ask, he told them that they were all NF members. This was definitely in light of the fact that they had all witnessed the murder and were being baptized on the spot. Cervantes claimed he dropped Bird off later that night at Fat Joe's house. Cervantes recalled that there was a conversation about how Fat Joe was stamped and that the NF does not stamp people for doing nothing. Several weeks later, Bird came back to San Jose. Joe, the person who actually shot Kung Fu, had just gotten pulled as an NR member. Cervantes asked Bird about the decision to kill Kung Fu, and Bird mentioned that fat dude. Cervantes asked Bird who he was talking about, and Bird said, "That dude, Fat Joe from Hayward." Cervantes recalled that Bird mentioned Fat Joe's name about how Fat Joe had said something to Bird about Kung Fu. Cervantes testified that he did not believe that Bird was taking orders from Fat Joe. Rather, something that Fat Joe had said helped Bird make that final conclusion to move forward with the decision Bird had already had in mind. Cervantes understood that Fat Joe was functioning with Bird at around the time Kung Fu was murdered. He believed that whatever Fat Joe said to Bird helped him make the final decision to kill Kung Fu. When the investigation commenced into the circumstances surrounding Kung Fu's murder, one of the first things they did was to go through Kung Fu's phone and to see who he had been in contact with. One of the last contacts he had received a call from was somebody that went by the name of Carl Gambino. This was a boneheaded mistake by a boneheaded dude. Carl Gambino was a name that Young Buck was apparently going by, or this was a name that he used to activate his phone. Young Buck and his older brother Martin Sykes Martinez were both members of my regiment, and I can tell you now from personal experience that when it comes to intelligence, that this isn't one of Young Buck's strong suits. In fact, when they did a more detailed search of Kung Fu's call logs, they also discovered calls he had received from Bird and Fat Joe. When all their call logs were searched, they seen that they were all calling each other, and that all the activity continued up until Kung Fu was killed, and then it abruptly stopped as soon as the murder was carried out. On August 13, 2012, at 10:40 a.m., Bird called Kung Fu. After Bird called Kung Fu, he called Young Buck. Within 2 minutes of that call, Bird called Fat Joe and again had a 43-second conversation. Afterwards, there was another call made by Fat Joe to Bird. Bird then received 2 phone calls from Kung Fu. Subsequent phone calls were made between Young Buck and Bird. There was also a 3-way call. At around 2:30 p.m., Bird made 2 phone calls to Fat Joe. At 11:10 p.m., Young Buck called Bird. The following day, on August 14th, there were several phone calls between Fat Joe and Bird. Moral of the story, don't use your cell phone if you're out there involved in this type of activity. In the end, all these cases were tied in together, and Maddog, Happy, Bird, and Hennessy were all indicted and convicted on the federal RICO case. Maddog was sentenced to 432 months in federal prison. Bird was sentenced to life in federal prison plus an additional 120 months. Happy was sentenced to 900 months in federal prison. And Hennessy was sentenced to 384 months in federal prison. You can call them true believers and stand-up guys, but because of the hard lines they were all pushing and because of what they believed in, they're all but guaranteed to spend the rest of their natural lives in federal prison, and this is undoubtedly where they will also die. I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode of Paradigm Media News. We're already working on a number of other projects, so be on the lookout for at least 1 or 2 to drop this week. As I had alluded to previously, I'm going to start dropping shorter episodes between some of the longer, more detailed ones like this one here to get more content out. Also, get your questions in for our next Q&A. Drop your questions in any one of our comment sections and we'll find them. As always, thank you all for your support and for all the positive commentary that the majority of you give us.